Namaskar and welcome to Live Your Best Life Unscripted. Today we have Shayamal Vallabhjee, a celebrated sports scientist, high performance coach, and an author. Shayamal has spent over 2 decades working with some of the world's most elite athletes, combining the power of science, spirituality, and sports to unlock their full potential. Now, his holistic approach emphasizes the integration of physical fitness, mental resilience, and spiritual well-being, setting new benchmarks for what it means to thrive in sports and in life. Shayamal, buddy, it's good to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ajay. It's been a decade of us having these amazing conversations, and I love them every single time.
So, which part of the world are you coming from?
I'm flying in from Mumbai, but I've only been there for 12 hours. I was in Barcelona before that.
So. Oh, fantastic. So, ladies and gentlemen, this guy has been traveling all across the globe, and today we have him with us. So, Shayamal, your career spans decades of holistic well-being and sports science. If you dwell back into your background, tell me how your background has helped you in that holistic well-being and sports science with the athletes.
So, Ajay, the first thing is, it's been quite a speckled path, but it was not crafted or engineered. It all just went with the flow. As you know, I grew up in South Africa. I grew up wanting to play sport. Unfortunately, I grew up at a time when there was the apartheid. So people of color really never got an opportunity to play. So I was not ready to leave my career in sports, so I studied sports and exercise science. I spent 5 years working with professional teams. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family that was very, very spiritual. Service was at the core of everything we did. And I was at a crossroads and I didn't know what to do. So I took a little bit of a sabbatical and I started to live as a monk in the temple. And that was probably one of the most powerful experiences of my life that actually showed me what the power of spirituality is in unlocking true performance. It also navigated me towards really understanding psychology and then integrating everything. And as I started to work more and more with professional athletes and with elite CEOs, I realized that people were really, really focused on a lot of the macro things, but the subtle things that actually erode contentment, achievement, that make the body feel calm and relaxed were things that were completely negated. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted to bring those subtle elements in because it was the subtle elements that make all the difference.
Exactly. I mean, that's amazing because you mentioned about working with the elite teams and some of the most elite athletes in the world, and then moving into spirituality, living life as a monk. How is that life as a monk,
That the life of the monk was not easy. It was difficult. But the first thing it taught us was discipline. We had to wake up every single morning at 3:30 a.m. And the beautiful thing about it, which I saw in the world of athletes, but I really never understood. When I lived in the temple, we lived in a dormitory style accommodation, and there were about 20 of us there. So every morning you got to wake up at 3:30 a.m. You don't have the luxury of sleeping because everyone is waking up. So that's the first thing I really learned, is that if you want to change, you have to inject yourself into an environment where everyone's behaving the same way, and then the environment forces you to behave in that way. Mm-hmm. If you stay there for long enough, that becomes habitual. That becomes a part and parcel of who you are. So that's what the temple taught me. It taught me, how do you find the right environment, right? How do you find the right mentors in there, inject yourself in there. And then one of the other powerful things I learned really early on in the temple was we used to eat only 2 meals a day, Ajay. Mm-hmm. And one meal was breakfast, the second was lunch. And the temple used to encourage you to eat one of those 2 alone, right? So you had to decide whichever one you wanted to, but you had to be by yourself, and there was no digital devices or anything. So you had to really be mindfully present with yourself and with your food when you're doing that. And then you also had to respect other people's spaces, but know how to set boundaries to ask for your own space. it was the subtle engineering in the environment that really taught me how to coach athletes to create the perfect ecosystem for themselves.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you heard Shayamal talk about integrating into what you really like. And many athletes focus only on physical training and not on an integrated approach. Let's explore this philosophy and ask Shayamal how integrating mental, physical, and spiritual training redefines sports.
So, in a holistic approach for an athlete, we're looking at 4 main components. So the 4 components we're looking at are physical, which is your nutrition and your training. We're looking at technical, which is how well do you currently execute a skill, and that's what the practice comes in. You look at tactical, which is your strategy that encompasses your strengths and weaknesses to execute a game plan. And then you're looking at the mental. So these are the 4 main criteria that we generally look at. What we've seen is that a lot of athletes focus on the physical and the technical and the tactical, they leave the mental out. The integration of spirituality with mental and it comes into that component. Now, the question you asked is, what is the role of spirituality in well-being and performance? Well, what it does is it grounds you more than anything else. See, Ajay, in the world of sport can be very humbling. One day you're on the top, the next day you're at the bottom. What is humility? Humility is a recognition of the fact that no matter what I do, there's always been this invisible energy that's guiding me and helping me. Humility is the ability to recognize that energy in your success. Okay, so that's the first thing we want our athletes to learn, because a humble athlete is an athlete who is always willing to learn from anyone. Now, the only way to succeed, and I've worked with athletes who are legends, the only way to succeed is to remember that from the day I start till the day I end, I will always be a student of the game. A student of the game means what? I learn from anyone and everyone. But as you scale up the ladder, to be able to learn from everyone means you need to be grounded. You need to be humble. Spirituality brings that into your life so that no matter where you are, right, it teaches you to focus on the small things. It teaches you to ask the right question. Because the world is changing. In business, in sport, we live in a very VUCA world. So your strategy has to keep changing. The only way your strategy can evolve is if you have good information. The only way you're going to get good information is if you learn to ask good questions. Humility teaches you the art and science of asking good questions so that you receive good information.
Fantastic. I mean, Shayamal, you mentioned a lot about being humble, humility. Okay, and today in this fast-moving or fast-paced society, where people are running after success, and when they achieve that success, sometimes they forget being humble. They think about they have achieved it. So what would your advice would be, when you reach at the top, how to stay humble and be involved with people?
So the thing that I'm always telling everyone is, yes, as you grow up, you get success. It's very easy to think it's all me. I have done everything. If you start to evaluate everything in your life through the lens of success, I tell people, when you think of success, the camera is pointing towards you. So you're measuring the title I have, the money I have, the position I have. You're looking at all of those things. When you keep looking at I, you elevate yourself. You have to switch the camera around and you have to evaluate everything you do through the lens of impact. Impact means what? How is every decision I'm making improving someone else's life? So as you go higher and higher and higher up the ladder, my job as a life and performance coach is to keep switching the lens, saying, hey, listen, now you're going to get to a stage where it's not about money. It's going to get to a stage where it's not about title, but you're going to understand that every word you utter, every action, every time you step on the field is lifting someone else. That's impact. So how do I help people? I constantly switch the lens. I said, success is irrelevant right now. Right, now it's impact. You've moved beyond that. You've moved up Maslow's hierarchy. It's no more about success because that will take care of itself. Let's evaluate every decision we take through the lens of impact.
Fantastic, lovely words. You also mentioned about those 4 criteria you talked about. I want you to focus on the camera and tell our viewers, about those 4 key points you mentioned about.
So the 4 criteria that we look at when we try to mold a professional athlete is, the first one is physical, and physical is the training and the nutrition. The second is technical. Technical is where your coaches come in, and they're constantly modifying your technique with respect to your skills. The third is tactical. Tactical is your game plan. How are you using your strengths and weaknesses in accordance with a specific game plan? And the fourth is mental. And what exactly is mental? Mental is your ability to stick to your game plan irrespective of what's happening on the outside environment. Whether you are winning or whether you're losing, you stick to a game plan. And mental is probably the most important thing. The reason why it's the most important is because if you have a predetermined game plan and you go into a match, if things are not going well and you change it in the middle, then we have bad data because we've not followed the game plan. So we've got 50% of data from a game plan we decided and 50% from a game plan you decided. So we have 0 data that's actually good enough for us to understand how to move forward. A mentally strong athlete sticks to the game plan and divorces themselves from the outcome because they realize that the data can inform good process. And at the end of the day, process is integral for success.
Thank you, Shayamal. So, ladies and gentlemen, you heard Shayamal talking about data. You're talking about, how data is important. And in today's world, we are living in the world of artificial intelligence, technology. And technology has become a huge part of training programs today. So let me ask Shayamal that, we have a lot of variables. We have a lot of data analysis, okay? And how does these variables and data analysis help in sports training today?
Great. I'm a massive fan of data. I'm always wearing devices that are tracking everything. In the world of professional sport, much like the world of business, data is an essential thing. But Ajay, data can only help if you know what you're looking for. You have to have clarity of thought with what you're looking for so that the data can give you good enough insight. If you don't know what you're looking for, the data can be a mind trap. It can be a rabbit hole that sends you in a million different directions. So the first thing I tell everyone is you have to have clarity of thought with what we're trying to improve, and then use the data to sort of validate that thought process. And as we move into the world of professional sports, we don't show up with a data set every day and tell the athletes, okay, this data point is wrong, we have to do this. No, we use the data to validate and inform our intuitive thinking. As you move higher up the ladder, as you move to the pinnacle, to the cutting edge of performance, you must realize there will be no data there. There, it's feel. There, it's an alignment between the body, the mind, and the soul. And I tell my athletes, you can go around the world 1,000,000 times. The American Indians have a beautiful saying. They say the longest journey a person will embark on is the journey from the head to the heart, which means the journey from overthinking everything to feeling your way. Performance is about flow. Performance is not about making it happen, but it's about letting it happen. And that comes from an intuitive trust, which can only come when you start to align this here. And data helps you get there, but there's a point where you got to step away from the data and feel your way through.
Fantastic. Buddy, this brings me to a thing, my wife is an overthinker. What would you like to tell her? She overthinks on everything.
Yeah, a lot of people tend to overthink on everything, and the mind is there. You can't tell an overthinker to not think. The reason why they're overthinking is because the cognitive aspects of their brain are really overdeveloped, and what's called a limbic system, which is how to feel, is rarely being suppressed. So the way I work, and a lot of my athletes are like this, or my executives are like this, I walk them through a process of really connecting to the body and learning how to feel. These people, if you ask them any question, they have a great answer because they have a cognitive answer. Connecting that cognitive answer to what it feels like in the body is where we need to help them. So you give them a question like, how do you calm yourself down? How do you meditate? They'll give you an academic answer. But if you ask them to feel that, there's a little bit of a gap in that. So how do we help people like this? Is we help them feel what they cognitively know. And the best way to do this is, we have a beautiful saying. We say, subtract before you add, which means overthinkers are always trying to do more, more, more. We have to encourage them to do less, less, less. We have to create space and teach them how to trust that space.
Yeah. That's an amazing piece of advice for our listeners, and I hope my wife is also on the screen and listening to Shayamal, okay? So, nutrition, is often underestimated, but is the backbone on an athlete, and it's important for their performance. Now, let's ask Shayamal and delve deeper into this, critical aspect. Why is balanced nutrition important for the athletes?
So, balanced nutrition is everything. But before we even talk of nutrition, when we work with professional athletes, we have a beautiful saying. We say, you are not a byproduct of what you eat. You're a byproduct of what your body can digest. So this is the fundamental holy grail of it. You can eat the healthiest food, but if you do not have enough gut bacteria and a healthy gut to break down that food, you're not accessing any of the nutrition. So the first part of mindful aspect of nutrition comes in with your relationship with how you think about food and how you heal your gut is the first thing. The reason why nutrition is important is because everything in our body gets fueled through the food we eat. There's no other way to take anything in. So you have to eat food, it has to digest, which manages your blood, which manages your rejuvenation, manages your recovery, manages your growth. Everything comes through the food that we consume. But where I find people make that big mistake is they think, okay, because I eat something healthy once or twice in a day, I can now neglect my health of my gut for the rest of the hours. I've done that and it takes care. No. You have to take care of your gut perpetually. You have to maintain that balance so that the food you eat is actually working for you. And the reason it's, like I say, it's absolutely essential because it fuels every part of our growth, our nutrition, our mental well-being, everything. And Ajay, if I give you one simple piece of research that not too many people realize, is that if you eat anything, within 20 minutes of you consuming it, it starts to impact the way you think. Within 20 minutes. So if you're eating highly processed, calorie-dense foods, highly dense in sugars, within 20 minutes, it's creating a dopamine effect. You're going to need a lot more. It's making you a bigger risk taker, all of that. Eating a balanced diet with high protein, good fats, is stabilizing your blood glucose. You are way more in control of your decisions. You're way more in control of your willpower that you bring to any decision. So this is a massive science that we can go into, but it all starts with really being mindfully present about what you consume and how you heal your gut on a 24-hour basis.
Let me ask you, you are sometimes in Goa, sometimes you're in Himachal, sometimes you're in Spain, you're meeting different athletes, different teams, How do you balance your nutrition?
This is great. So I have a few rules of thumb. One is I don't eat on planes. Okay, whenever I'm eating traveling, I don't consume any food because our body goes out of alignment, not so much because of our sleep cycles, but because of our nutrition cycles. When you eat at the wrong time, your body cannot digest it. It affects your entire bowel movement, your entire digestive process. That's what moves you out of alignment. I keep my body in alignment by eating only when I'm on the ground, and I eat at certain times in accordance to the time zone that I am in. The second thing is I'm very, very particular with what I eat. Now, it's not possible to always be drinking 2 to 3 liters of water. When you're going into a flight, your body goes into a little bit of a fetal stage, so it doesn't want to drink. It doesn't want to consume water. More importantly than drinking is eating foods that release water. Okay, and my way of really balancing the body is I work in alignment with the 5 elements. To give you a very quick snapshot of it, fire is being exposed in natural sun. Okay, air is I practice breath work, starting and ending every single day. Earth is I'm eating whole plant-based foods, and I try to spend a minimum of 15 to 20 minutes a day barefoot walking on the earth, grounding myself. Okay, water is eating foods that release water, okay, and space is fasting. So I really and truly, I'm a big advocate of fasting, giving the system some space to heal.
Good to hear that. I mean, Shayamal, you've been involved with a lot of teams, and, ladies and gentlemen, every sport is unique and it demands specific skills. Now, customizing training programs seems essential. So let me ask Shamal that how customizing training or planning a training for an athlete is important for an athlete to excel.
Yeah, it's massively important. And the word we use in professional sport is called periodization. So periodization means that we are picking dates in a calendar, and sometimes we can go right micro to the hour when the body needs to peak. And if you look at a professional sprinter, he'll probably need to peak 10 times. If you look at a cricketer, he's playing certain games in a season when he needs to peak. Once you periodize and understand where you need to peak, you give your body enough rejuvenation time. You understand when to press on the training so that you get to that. I think the way corporate world gets it wrong is we're trying to peak 365 days a year. It's too mentally and physically exhausting to do that. So why program design is critically important is because we're taking all of the aspects around wellness into account. We're realizing that for us to eat perhaps a really nutrition-dense, high-protein meal is heavy on the stomach and it's needed at a certain time. If you eat that meal when you're not training, it'll have an adverse effect. How do we balance our recovery? How do we balance our sleep? The only way to do that is to have pinpoint clarity on when you need to peak. And when you need to peak will inform all our program design, which is your sports science, your nutrition, your training, your recovery, every single element that we can look at.
Let me ask you something personal. What is that one cheat meal you would do?
My cheat meal is pizza.
Oh, okay.
I love pizza. I love pizza. But I have a rule. When I say I don't deny myself anything, but I give myself only the best of it. So for example, because I love pizza, I don't eat pizza every day and anywhere. I know where the best pizzerias in the world are, and I wait until I'm in that city to reward myself with that. The problem is not in the cheat meal. The problem is not in eating what you really love. The problem is in eating the foods that you love in a substandard quality on a prolonged basis of time. That's where we get wrong. So if you have this attitude of, I will eat what I love, but I'll only eat the best of it, right? Then you start to bring this reward system into play and you work towards that. So that's what I do.
So you have a mental toughness on that. Mentally you prepare yourself.
For sure.
The attitude which is there. So ladies and gentlemen, we heard about, pizza, but with an attitude, okay? And do the best. So, ladies and gentlemen, mental toughness often makes the difference between good and great athletes, So let's explore how this is built. And let me ask Shamal, how mental conditioning help athletes during those high performance moments,
Ajay, you framed this question so well. Mental toughness is the difference between good and great. This is probably one question I get asked all the time. How does someone move from good to great? And the one thing, I've spent 21 years traveling with the world's best athletes, from the Indian and South African cricket teams and tennis teams to Olympic athletes and stuff. And I've seen that the people that make the transition from good to great have one thing. And that one thing that they have is very unheard of, unseen, and is not what you would hear. Most people would say discipline, dedication, grit, tenacity. They would say all of that. But the one thing that elevates you from good to great is self-compassion. Mm-hmm. Why do I say self-compassion? Because you will try every day. And most of the time in the world of sport, you fail. But the message you tell yourself when you fail will determine how quickly you come back and try. That is self-compassion. The person who's kind enough to themselves to acknowledge every effort, that doesn't self-sabotage the ability to come back, is the one that achieves greatness. Because greatness is a byproduct of repetition, right? And a lot of the times, we self-sabotage ourselves in that process of actually getting there. So the difference between good and great is actually self-compassion. And self-compassion is the language that we use and we tell ourselves when things are not going well. That is also mental toughness. How do you withstand? How do you stay with a particular narrative that's raising your confidence, raising your self-esteem, irrespective of what the external results are saying? If you can keep mastering that, practicing that, you will undoubtedly unlock greatness. And we spoke earlier on about the external environment. Having people around you that ratify that message is also critically important. You surround yourself with people bringing you down, then that environment's not pushing you up. In an environment like an elite sports team or an elite company, we say a rising tide lifts all ships. So how do you know if you're in the right environment? Every single person in the environment is growing. A rising tide lifts all ships. If everyone in the environment is not growing, someone is pulling you down.
You spoke about self-compassion.
Yeah.
Let's simplify this for our listeners. And can you share some experiences or, what are the examples of self-compassion?
So self-compassion, Ajay, such a beautiful question, is really and truly being kind to yourself when things don't go according to plan. You've tried really, really hard. You went, maybe you lost in the final. Maybe you bowled a no ball in the last over, you got hit for 6. You had no intention to do that. You went in there, it cost your team, it betrayed your team, it did a lot of things that sabotaged the result, right? Now, you can come back into the locker room and blame yourself, saying, I should have practiced harder, I should have done that. But the truth is, you did everything. You had all the pieces of and the intention was never that. Being able to tell yourself that, listen, you gave it your best, you tried your best, the result didn't go well, it's absolutely okay. I will come and I'll try again tomorrow. Me trying again tomorrow doesn't mean that it won't happen again, but I know that my intention was great. I know that I put in all the work that I could. And because I did that, right, I'm not going to hold myself and press myself down, irrespective of what everyone else is saying. And this comes around with that word trust. And the fastest way, people always ask me, how do we fast track and build trust in a sports team? And I tell people, it's not hard to build trust in a sports team because we see each other working hard. We had practice together, we see them pushing it. Trust is difficult to build in an ecosystem when you don't see someone working, right? Mm-hmm. And you're not seeing them doing anything, but you got to trust that they're doing it somewhere else, right? That's where it's difficult. In a sports team where you see people doing it, it's very easy to trust that person, right? And when you trust a person, it's very easy to allow them to be kind to themselves when errors go wrong. So kindness is what self-compassion is, right? And once you start to put in the work and once you start being kind, if you're in the right ecosystem, the same message is being heard by 1 million people around you. So that's what it is.
So you spoke about self-compassion, you spoke about trust in the sports field. How would that play a role in the corporate world?
In the corporate world, how does trust come in? How does self-compassion come in? Is the ability to lean in when your KPI is not at risk. So that means that I may be here, my department's going really well, but I can see the other guys are struggling. I can see they need help. I may be able to lend a few resources. I may be able to help them. I may understand someone who can do something, right? A lot of people just take a step back. It's their business. I have nothing to do with it. Self-compassion and trust is when you lean in where you're not expected to. That's what builds trust in the corporate environment, right? Lean in where your KPI doesn't matter. Lean in where it doesn't even impact your bonus or it doesn't impact your team, but it helps someone else. A rising tide lifts all ships. That's the ethos we got to bring into every single organization.
Fantastic, So, build trust. That means the people around you, the communities around you. So, ladies and gentlemen, what you heard from Shayamal is building the trust, building that self-compassion and building those communities. Now, let me ask Shayamal, on this, that building communities in sports is important. And I would like to ask you, Shayamal, is that how building communities within sports or in the corporate world helps you to excel or grow in your performance?
It helps you to excel because, Ajay, irrespective of what you do, in the business world, in the sports world, you're going to make mistakes. When you make a mistake, our human brain has a tendency to amplify that mistake. Even if you do 100 things right and you do one thing wrong, your brain will amplify it. What does community do? Community makes you feel comfortable and makes you realize that that one error that I made, I'm not the only one who's made that error. 100 people are experiencing the same thing. 100 people are experiencing the same difficulties. 100 people are struggling with balance. 100 people may have someone ill at home but are managing that whilst they're straddling this as well. Community creates a sense of wholeness. Whereas if you're not in a community, you're isolated and you internalize every problem. But when you start to be in a community, you realize the problem is bigger than me and a lot of people are experiencing it. The other thing is when you are working by yourself, you think every problem is permanent. When you're in a community, you realize there's a sense of impermanence with every single situation we do. It's good for the body, it's good for the mind, it's good for everyone else. And you know, coming from India, we're recording in India, most of our audience is India. There's something that's sacrosanct in Indian community. It's seva, it's service, you know. So why is that so sacrosanct? Because when we start to give, it's no more about us. Yeah. And I keep telling everyone, you know, I'm a massive breathwork practitioner. If you look at breathwork as a practice, Ajay, right at the heart of breathwork is this beautiful practice called Kapalbharti, which is this aggressive, forceful, vigorous exhalation. You ask any teacher to teach you this, he says forcefully exhale. That's the heart of pranayama, the heart of service. And what is it saying? It's saying forcefully give. Mm-hmm. No one says worry about what's coming in. The incoming takes care of itself, right? So I keep telling everyone, the heart of community is service. The heart of community is forcefully giving. When you forcefully give, you don't have to worry where things come from. The incoming takes care of itself.
Exactly. You mentioned a beautiful word called seva, which is very Indian, you know, and since you said we are recording this in India, let me ask you something very personal. What is that one seva which you enjoy the most?
The thing that I enjoy, my one seva, is I love mentoring my closest friends' kids. You know, my closest friends who have kids anywhere between the age of, say, 8 and 16, 17, who, you know, as kids start to grow up, the parental love is there, but sometimes the kids are not listening to the advice of that. This is my profession, working, helping, amplify. You know, I love leaning in there, being that voice of support, being that friend, creating that new perspective, taking them out for a coffee or a juice, taking them on a holiday, chatting. My really one thing that fuels me is really being that pillar of support for people who are really close to me. And that obviously extends working with other athletes and stuff. But when I do it with people that are close to me and family and friends, it really triggers off a whole different level of emotion.
Fantastic, you know. And also, Shayamal, is you mentioned about children, you talk about high performance athletes, you know. So children are always energetic, and even in sports, the athletes are, you know, doing their best, and injuries are always, you know, there. And it's a challenge.
Of course.
How does a holistic well-being, and from your experience, how does a holistic well-being help, you know, when they are facing those challenges about injuries, or it lifts them up, the holistic well-being?
Yeah. The holistic well-being creates different perspective, Ajay. It's such a brilliant question. You know, when you embark down the path of being a professional athlete, you never know when that journey will end by accident. You know, you could get an injury in practice, you can get an injury in competition. You never know when that ends. If you pin all your hopes on the fact that I'm going to have longevity and it suddenly ends, what happens is your entire world starts to crumble and you don't even know how to take that next step forward. Where spirituality helps is, you know, you're able to look at things from a different perspective. What is spirituality? Spirituality is bringing calmness and stillness into the body. Why do we need that? We need that because every time you have a thought, and we have about 80,000 thoughts a day, every time you have a thought, there's a knee-jerk reaction to respond to that. Spirituality, through the form of stillness, creates a gap from the moment a thought is born to the moment you try to respond or react. That gap is your entire life. Everything happens in that gap. Your mistakes happen, your good decisions happen, the language you use to tell yourself, everything is in that world. The greater the gap we create, the more options and perspectives you have. Mm-hmm. Why is spirituality important? Is because you condition that gap so that when anything that's unforeseen happens in this world, we got enough space to evaluate perspectives, right? And approach revitalized with a different pathway. That's why we're trying to do it.
Fantastic. Let me ask you, what are some of those holistic methods through which the athletes can prevent the injuries? What is your advice on that?
I mean, the best way is really and truly process. To have healthy processes. Ajay, I'll tell you a very personal story, and I'll tell you, and it's been with me for probably 25, 30 years now. When I was 16 years old, I wanted to be a professional athlete in South Africa. I told you this. And because I wanted to be a professional athlete, I was not a great student. I didn't like studying too much. And I had this test coming up, and my father kept telling me, study, 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 study. And I never studied at all. The test came and I got lucky. Not once, I got lucky twice. The first time I got lucky it was a multiple choice test, right? So I didn't have to know anything, I just had to guess. The second time I got lucky was I guessed really, really well. Okay, I knew nothing, but when the results came, I got an A+. So I ran home and told Dad, I got an A+. And my father told me something. He said, Shayamal, I wish you failed. My dad. I started crying. I didn't speak to him for 3 days. He called me after 3 days. We went for a walk and he's telling me, do you know why I said this to you? He says, I said this to you because the most dangerous thing in the world that can happen is when your brain connects a bad process to a good result. You know and I know you didn't study. Right? When I told you, I wish you failed, it came from a place of love because I wanted you to realize that process of not working will never produce an A+ consistently.
Wow.
Right. He says it was love. And that stayed with me because that is what I tell all of my athletes. I said, the only thing you can evaluate yourself by is by the quality of the processes you put in place. How do you avoid injury? We can't avoid injury. Injury is a part and parcel of that sport. But you can minimize it by making sure your processes are good. How you go to bed, how you hydrate, what time you wake up, when you put your digital device away, the quality of food you eat, the quality of conversation. I remember, I think it was Phil Jackson, who was one of the first lessons he used to teach his professional athletes was how do you tie your shoelace? Why? Because if you tie your shoelace wrong, there's friction between your sock and your shoe. That friction creates a blister. That blister can create an injury that puts you out of the game. It's meticulous attention to the small things that can prevent big things. And that's all I'm trying to do with my athletes. It's just mindfully create enough space so that we can put the magnifying glass on all the small things.
You mentioned about, your question paper was multi-questions, there. How did you get an A+?
Just guessing.
Just guessing?
Just guessing. I had nothing. It's like guessing. Like I said, okay, A so many times. I can't go A again because it's not looking great. Put a C, put a B. Maybe a few things I recognized in there. But that was it. It was pure luck of guessing.
Wow. So do you say that sometimes you should go by your gut instinct if you feel? Is that so what you're saying?
I think gut instinct is critically important. Always go by your gut instinct. But I'm telling people that, even working with the gut requires you to train it.
Yeah.
Like most of us, I would tell you go with your gut. But if you have data on how strong your gut intuition is, if you have no data on how strong that gut is, if you've never listened to it, then don't go with it. Go with the data. Go with the process. Everything is a byproduct of our meticulous attention to it.
Fantastic. We talk about the gut instinct, we talked about, guessing, and ladies and gentlemen, athletes evolve over time, and so should their training programs, So let's ask Shayamal and asking about the feedback system. Shayamal, how does the feedback system or mechanism, in sports, and I will also add here is in the corporate world, it helps a person to perform well and to excel in the field. The feedback system, is it important?
The feedback system is critically important. And in the world of sport, we make that debrief, that feedback a part and parcel of everything. So every single practice, for example, when we start a new practice, we start with an exercise called you, me, we. So randomly, the whole group standing there, so the coach would nominate a person and say, you. Tell us what you did right, what you did wrong. So you say, from the previous practice, I did X, Y, Z right, or this is what I'm working on. Now that person has to nominate someone else, right? So he says me, then he nominates you. I think you were doing this right. I think you should work on this. And then he says we as a team need to work on this here. So this is a process of connecting every single practice to the next practice. It's a process of sort of moving forward. The debrief is critically important. Now also, a large part of the debrief that doesn't happen in the corporate world is asking the question, how am I doing? We're very used to saying how the others are doing,
Yeah.
but no one has the confidence and the conviction and the courage to ask, how am I doing? And receive that feedback without any repercussions to the person saying it. So how you ask for feedback, how you give feedback is a direct byproduct of the safety in that system. And it's a skill that needs to be practiced, Ajay. You know, people need to do it every single day, every single meeting. Only when it becomes culture will it start to work for you. But before it becomes culture, it requires a level of discipline.
I love those words you mentioned, you, me, and we. Can you dwell more on that and share with our listeners how this you, me, and we works, and how it is important for them to excel?
So, You, Me, We is an exercise we created. We bring it into every single team environment. You, Me, We means a coach nominates and says, you. What are you doing right? How are you trying to evaluate your process? How are you trying to get better? What have you learned from anything that you've done recently? Right. Then he says he nominates someone else. So he's speaking through the lens of me. Then he nominates someone speaking through the lens of that person. You, I think you should be working on this. And then you look at it from a macro perspective where you look at we as a team. What is it that we can do better? How can we start to do it? Another interesting exercise that we do in alignment with this is in any team. Now, most of us know if you take a cricket team, for example, you think, hey, they're batters, all-rounders, bowlers, spinners. But any team has 4 players in there. You get a person who is the proposer of ideas, so he's giving new ideas. You get the person who is the opposer of ideas. So any idea put on the table, he doesn't like it. You get the person who is the supporter of ideas, and he is always supporting irrespective. And you get the person who's always quiet in the room who says nothing. So another way of bringing this exercise around with you, me, we is we attribute different roles to people and we rotate them. And when you start to rotate roles, then Ajay, you are not always the person proposing an idea as the leader of an organization. Sometimes your job is to oppose, sometimes it's to support, and sometimes it's to stay quiet. And once you start to rotate these roles, what happens is a role can't be attached to a person's identity. And once you start to do that, you start to receive feedback from anyone because you realize tomorrow I could be the critic. You don't start to evaluate the person and attach negative feedback to him. That's why people don't give feedback, because they think that the feedback's going to attach to the person. But if you start to rotate these roles in the team, negative feedback is heard but not attributed to any person because it's rotating. This way here, you create a really psychological and trusting environment.
You mentioned something critical about a negative feedback, and always, sometimes in the corporate world also, even in personal life, when we receive a negative feedback, people either go into a shell or they start thinking how to get back to that person.
Correct.
Tell me, how do you manage that? Or how people should manage that when they get a negative feedback?
So, in my locker room, whenever I work with any team, we put up a poster right in the beginning. And we say, that poster says something very simple. It says, it's not you against me. It's us against them. Wow. First thing. Right? It's not you against me, it's us against them. This is an ideology that we have to bring in. And once you start to bring in ideology, irrespective of what's saying, irrespective of who's saying it, it's not you against me, it's us against them. It's about getting us stronger to take them on. That's the critical thing. Once you start to bring in this ideology here, then feedback is heard and received in a much, much better way.
Fantastic. So now I'm going to ask you some open-ended and thought-provoking questions.
Okay, no problem. Let's go for it.
Let's go for it?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me something. Can you share a pivotal moment in your journey, that shaped your approach to wellness?
For me, it was definitely being in the temple. Going into the temple taught me how to be mindful about eating, taught me how to trust space. That's one of the biggest things for me. Space is everything that I do. The temple taught me how to trust it. Really be comfortable. I can sit in a room without anything for hours. I'm not looking, I'm not going to pick up the book, I can just sit here with myself, breathe and do that. That was the biggest changing moment for me in my career.
I follow you on Insta, I follow you on LinkedIn. You seem to be an avid reader, What what is the kind of books you read, you know?
Ajay, at any one time, I'm reading at least 5 books of different subjects, different things. When I pick a book up, every single book that I read, I have a Google form with my notes on it, on that book. So I'm very meticulous with how I do it. The advice that I tell everyone, which I follow in my life, is I'm not reading information I'm good at. I'm only following the path of curiosity. So if anybody tells me anything that invokes a little bit of curiousness, I'll buy that book and I'll follow the path of curiosity. Because being good takes a long time. You know, being creative takes a long time, but being curious can happen in moments. So I tell people, just follow the curious part. And I do the same with my reading. Anyone can tell me anything on a plane, anywhere that I heard. I could be an advert. Someone could even mention a place, and I'm very curious about it. I'll get some information, get a blog, get that. And the way I read is multifold. I'm reading blogs, I'm reading newsletters, I'm reading books, I'm reading magazines. I'm very curious with picking up everything because for me, language is critically important. More than the subject, I'm very interested in how does someone get that message across? How do we articulate it in the simplest way possible?
Let me ask you something personal since we are talking about books. What are those 5 books you would recommend anyone to read? If you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a few that are really good. There's one that is number 1 that I recommend everyone, which will take you a few years to finish, not because it's big, but because it's deep. It's the autobiography of a yogi from Paramahansa Yogananda. Fantastic book. The next book that I'm a big fan of is called The Art of Possibility by Benjamin Zanders. Benjamin Zanders was the maestro of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra, and he was the person who articulated the term quiet leadership. And the reason he came to this, it's a beautiful story because he asked himself, he says, everyone comes to an orchestra to listen to music and I never produce a sound. So what's my role in here? And he realized that my sound is an amalgamation of everyone's sound. So he created quiet leadership. That's The Art of Possibility by Benjamin Zanders. A book I like for corporates, executives is Hit Refresh, Satya Nadala's book. You know, very, very personal journey on how he reframed everything through the lens of empathy. I'm a massive fan of that. If you're looking at healing internally, I recommend everyone reading a simplified version of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. You know, and then probably one that I'm constantly visiting is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. It's a short, very thin book, very deep, thought-provoking, and I like it, yeah.
Fantastic. So you overall spoke about the entire holistic well-being, you know, whether through what you practice or through books and all. Tell me, what are those misconceptions about the holistic training which needs to be addressed in today's world?
The biggest misconception, and probably the only misconception, is we don't push the ceiling, we must raise the floor. So what do I mean by that? I mean, everybody is trying to they're looking at what they've done as their best, and they're trying to raise the bar on the best. Raising the bar on your best effort, whether it's a marathon, whether it's a number of push-ups, whether it's the revenue you've produced in a quarter, is mentally and physically exhausting. Right? When we say raise the floor, true performance is about understanding every single day what are the minimum things that I would do irrespective of what day it is. Right? So in the world of professional sport, my athletes, it could be 5,000 steps. Imran Khan, for example, did 50 push-ups every single day before he brushed his teeth. Didn't go to the gym, didn't bother whether he went to the gym because his floor was at 50 push-ups. When you understand what your floor is and you can do your floor consistently, that is the secret to longevity. That is really and truly the secret to performance. So look at a floor, establish a floor, and very, very gently raise the floor. And the floor should be so easy that you need zero equipment to do it. And you don't need anyone to do it. You can do it in a hotel room, you can do it in your office, you can do it anywhere you're traveling. That's how easy the floor should be.
Fantastic. One last thought-provoking question to you is, how do you manage success?
How do I manage success?
How do you manage success, or how should others manage success?
I think everyone should look at success as exactly like balance. You know, balance is not static, balance is not symmetrical. I wrote a book a few years ago, and I realized that balance was a subject everyone was searching for, no one found it. And I realized that no one found it because our definition of balance was wrong. we assumed balance had to be symmetrical and balance was static. It was a destination. And I realized that in nature, in plants, in air, in earth, in everything, balance is asymmetrical and balance is dynamic. What is 1 second is completely different the other second. It's ever flowing. My advice to everyone around success is approach success in the same way. Understand success is dynamic. What is successful today will not be success tomorrow. It's ever flowing. It's also ever evolving in relation to your environment and your ecosystem. When you bring a state of impermanence and a state of flow and a state of allowing things to happen to your definition of success, you divorce expectation from it. When you divorce expectation, you allow achievement and fulfillment to enter the door. So this is what I would say.
Fantastic. So we had some serious, thought-provoking questions here and your advice. Okay, now let's get into some fun side with Shayamal. Are you ready for that?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Rapid questions,
Sure.
rapid fire questions?
No problem.
Perfect.
No worries.
Okay. If not a sports scientist, what do you be?
Whether I would have been good is a different question, but I would have loved to have been a musician.
Why?
I don't know. I love music. I absolutely think, I love music. The way it inspires, the way it lifts people, it can change mood. It's just beautiful.
Any specific kind of music or anything which pleases you?
I grew up playing tabla.
Oh, wow. You're a tabla player too?
I played tabla for about 11, 12 years. I studied it. But I think now I would really like to be a proper percussionist or a guitarist. But yeah.
And I'm going to do this impromptu to you. The table is in front of you. Can you play some beats?
Absolutely, 100%.
Fantastic. That was the fun bit from Shayamal. Okay. Your favorite travel destination?
Now I'm living in my favorite travel destination, Barcelona. But outside of that, I'm a big fan of Italy because I love the food.
Oh, the pizza brings you there.
Oh my God, pizza as in Naples, good pasta in Rome. But yeah.
Why Barcelona? What attracts you to Barcelona?
Barcelona, first thing is the weather. When you come south of Paris, it gets a little bit warmer. And I'm not too good with the cold, so I like Barcelona. And also culturally, it's a beautiful epicenter of different types of cultures. I live right in Gaudi's Barcelona. Sagrada Familia is in front of me, so, it's beautiful.
Okay, so a quote or a saying that's always on your mind?
Subtract before you add. It's a life philosophy. Constantly minimalize, carve out. Create space. I'm like obsessed with giving away things, cleaning up the wardrobe, reducing the space in the day for things. Subtract before you add, because I'm addicted to having time for myself to be able to reflect and just be by myself. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. What's your biggest learning from athletes?
My biggest learning from athletes is how fleeting everything can be. You can be on top of the world one day, and the next day, it could be the end. And everything is in a state of temporariness. Everything's in a state of impermanence. I have been privileged to see people right at the top and see the same person at the bottom in a coffee shop where no one even recognizes them. So that was a harsh learning, but a very grounding learning that I've had in sport.
Fantastic. If you had a superpower for athletes, what would it be?
To forget what just happened. I think everyone needs that superpower.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that prevents athletes from succeeding is their mind is still in the past while they have to execute in the future. So, superpower, wipe the slate clean immediately.
Yeah, that's there in the corporate world too,
Exactly.
Keep thinking about the past. Fantastic. What's the funniest thing you have encountered working with athletes?
Ajay, athletes are crazy. Firstly, we have so much of time. So we're doing things, but we have a lot of downtime. So they're always playing tricks with each other. I'll tell you a few funny incidents. We're traveling with a cricket team, and you print boarding passes. So they always play this trick with the new youngsters that are coming. When we get the whole team's boarding passes, one of the jokesters in the team will ask for a plain boarding pass. Nothing's printed on it. And then they give it to a youngster and they tell the youngster, the printer ran out of ink, but don't worry, we're all traveling with the team. You just use this one and you go. And you watch this youngster try to go through security and he's trying to explain to the guard the printer wasn't working and the guard is looking at him. So we do that. I've had a cricketer, in the groin guard of another batsman spray deep heat. So the guy is standing in the middle there and it's all of a sudden very hot. So a lot of these things happen. To me personally, by the way, because I'm a big proponent of telling athletes drink apple cider vinegar a lot.
Yeah.
That I'm always telling them. So whenever we have a celebration party, they make me drink a lot of apple cider vinegar to make up for all the advice I've been giving them.
Fantastic. Okay, last one. What's one thing people misunderstand about sports psychology?
I think they misunderstand that psychology is a bit of a balance. It's a balance between healing and it's a balance between moving forward. And I think the one thing that is critically important with psychology is, as sports psychologists, you're drawing a line in the sand where from that moment on, nothing in the past matters, we're moving forward, right? And we don't constantly dive back. Sports psychologists, unlike other psychologists that are looking back and trying to heal the past, sports psychology is constantly always looking on how do we move the needle forward. That's the one really powerful and one of the best things about sports psychology.
Awesome. So thank you for those rapid fire questions, the fun side of yours. So ladies and gentlemen, this has been such a rich conversation with my friend and buddy Shayamal. Now let's wrap up with Shayamal with some of the actionable insights and a final message from Shayamal for aspiring athletes and those seeking holistic wellness. What is your advice, Shayamal?
My advice to everyone, not just athletes, first one is to subtract before you add. Right? Become addicted to creating space in your life. Physical space, mental space, all of that. It's really important for everyone to understand. Your physical environment is a mirror of your mental environment. If your physical environment is cluttered, if you don't have clarity on the people that are important and where you want to spend your time, you're going to lack the clarity in your own mind of your goals, of your direction, all of that. Very, very important. And like I said, the most critical thing is you have to be kind to yourself. Be compassionate, be kind to yourself. Do not sabotage your own journey of growth. If you can practice these two things here, success will not be a question of if it happens, it will be a question of when it happens.
Fantastic. So thank you, Shayamal, for such an enlightening conversation. Your insights into holistic wellness and sports training have been truly an eye-opening. And I'm sure our listeners have gained valuable takeaways on how to optimize their own health and performance. From the integration of mind, body, and spirit, what Shayamal shared, to the role of technology and community in fostering resilience, you have shown how to redefine success. I hope the listeners found this episode of Live Your Best Life Unscripted as inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed our discussion, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. And until next time, stay motivated, stay healthy, and continue living your best life unscripted.